Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This Shabbat, the text that we read from the Torah, talks to us in great detail about the particulars of how burnt offerings and sacrifices were offered on the altar in the desert tabernacle in the earliest years of our people's life. The very beginning of those instruction, when the Torah is offering the priests its detailed instruction manual about how the sacrifices are to be offered, it tells them to be certain that the burnt offering remains in place on the altar. It says, Esh hamizbeach tukad bo, the flame of the altar must remain upon it. What's wonderful about the Hebrew language is its flexibility and its elasticity, its openness to a wide range of interpretations. And so as it turns out, the Hebrew of that phrase, which is customarily read, the flame must remain upon it, can also be read to mean the flame of the altar must remain within him. That is to say, the priest himself is prohibited to allow his work to become rote. He's barred from allowing his holy service to feel routine or mechanical. And from this we learn that all of those who assume roles of community leadership must not lose that powerful and precious sensation of a flame burning within them. The ancient priests were anything but radical. They were the very embodiment of the Jewish establishment, the grand old legacy institutions of Jewish life. But within that system, it turns out, as within virtually all systems that we have participated in or led ourselves, over time, we find ourselves at some risk of feeling that our work has become calcified and stale. All leaders can lose the spark that drew them to sacred service in the first place. All leaders at times need to be reminded of the visionary zeal that inspired the family business once upon a time. The priests are experts at knowing how the system works. They understand the reassuring structure of rules and responsibilities. They can navigate bureaucracy expertly, but they're not always very good at the inspiration business. Over time, even the most solid and reliable institution can become dull and inert, and it needs to have its flame rekindled, to be fueled as only fire can do. Because if we know anything about fire, we know that it is eager to spread and reluctant to be contained. The reading of our Parsha reminds us that although Judaism insists that we remain respectful of our tradition and deferential to its rules about the altar and its implements, we also have to make certain that the fire upon it and inside us never goes out. This weekend, as Rabbi Fixler mentioned to you, our congregation and its leadership has chosen to position itself in partnership with NIFTY, with the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, with the Union of Reform Judaism, and all of the organs of Reform Judaism in North America, to lend our strength as a way of amplifying the voices of teenagers all across the country whose passion and energy have sparked an extraordinary groundswell of political action and protest against gun violence. Those voices, those young voices, have become a source of the altar's holy fire. The flame inside them has moved them, hundreds of thousands of them, across our country, to step up and to speak out. And so tomorrow, we will join with them in common cause to participate in the March for Our Lives and search for a remedy to the devastating violence that plagues us. Now, I have to confess to you, not altogether proudly, that I have felt ambivalent about this work. I'm quick to acknowledge that I'm a bit of a political cynic, though I prefer to think of myself as a realist. And to my mind, a march against gun violence, like so many other symbolic gestures of political advocacy, risks becoming hollow and meaningless. Because no one on any side of this discussion, after all, wants there to be more violence. The meaningful part of the gun debate in America lies in the pesky and difficult details and the specific practicalities about how to reduce violence and diminish suffering. A positive sense of feel-good unanimity and agreement is much more elusive once we get down to detail. But I will confess to you as well that I have found myself moved by these voices from our children, our teenagers. And those voices helped spark the flame of moral indignation around our country, and so I've done my best to listen to them. Because this issue, this crisis, is one that I think must demand the attention of any person of faith, especially in our country, which protects equally and simultaneously the exercise of our faith and the right to bear arms. The holy fire on the altar shines a light, and it's a bright light that cannot be ignored. And it tells us that now is a time for truth-telling. It's time for us to speak honestly about the hard reality of living inside the tension between our constitutionally protected rights and the undeniable reality of gun violence. Those of us who believe in the Second Amendment and those who seek its repeal should be equally dismayed by the fact that nearly half of Americans who own a handgun for protection have never been trained in how to handle it safely. We should all be shocked about the sheer numbers of gun violence victims in our nation, and we should feel shame about the fact that they are disproportionately people we are morally compelled to look after. Racial minorities who are vastly more likely to be shot and killed than their white counterparts. Women in abusive domestic relationships. And of course, most clearly and most devastatingly in recent days, our teenagers, our students, our children. Of the more than 100,000 Americans who are victims of gun violence each year, and that is a staggering number. More than 100,000 Americans who are victims of violence each year, roughly a fifth of them are children and teenagers, a group for whom guns are now the second leading cause of death. So it is a time for truth-telling, time for us to seriously and honestly undertake the search for solutions, which I think lies somewhere in the complex nexus of cultural and educational and legislative means, just like it did when we remedied the injuries, illness, and death from cigarette smoking and automobile accidents that took so many lives before we got serious about making change. It is time for truth-telling. In one of his famous teachings about Jewish theology, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg is famous for having said that after the Holocaust, we can no longer say anything about God that is not morally credible to be said in front of crematoria fed by children. And today I would add a corollary to that teaching. We can no longer say anything about guns in America that isn't morally credible to repeat in front of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High, or Columbine High, or Virginia Tech, or Sandy Hook, or. If we Jews are going to tell the truth, we have a great opportunity and a grand responsibility to draw on our best gifts, the gifts of Jewish creativity and Jewish inquiry, to be thoughtful in our acknowledgement of the right to Jewish self-defense afforded us by the Constitution, and honest about what happens when weapons meant for the battlefield increasingly come to be held by the mentally unstable, the chemically imbalanced, by the domestic abuser and the racist instigator. Friends, I think that one of a rabbi's primary responsibilities is to look for truth all the time. And so that was why, despite my misgivings and my resistance and my discomfort, it was important to me to be the best kind of listener I could be to our teenagers and to our young adults whose fire glows brightly in the altar of the Jewish future. I didn't, and I don't, and I likely won't agree with everything they say, which will come as no surprise to anyone who has parented a teenager. But I'm glad that I listened, and I want to encourage you to listen to them too. Because if a rabbi's primary responsibility is to seek the truth, then I think a synagogue's primary responsibility is to show up and be there when someone wants to speak their truth. That's our job together. And it's very important that this place uphold that responsibility carefully and conscientiously. Our Torah takes very seriously the instructions it issues the priests about how to do their job. It dedicates more than a full book of the 5 to the detailed instructions about how the priests offer sacrifices, what they wear and how they carry the implements, how they offer the sacrifices and prepare the offerings. There's no shortage of voices in the Torah about those who seek to preserve and protect the status quo. But there is a remarkable and inviting lack of holy fire. We need the voices that kindle that fire, the voices of those teenagers whose focus and passion and flame will inspire those of us who hold the old, reliable levers of power to figure out the details, to figure out how to thread the constitutional needle that will preserve diligently Americans' rights to both life and liberty. When our Torah portion this week concludes its instructions about the priests' clothing, about their ritual behavior, and their tasks at the altar, it concludes with a grave instruction about the flame of the altar. Esh tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo tichbe. A perpetual flame must be kept burning at the altar. Do not let it go out. The bearers of our flame are our young people. They are the students who have spoken up and stepped out and who continue to show up. Their flame will continue to light the way and illuminate the work we do together. It will shine on the path as they march for their lives, and we stand with them. And they will know that we have heard them. And as we stand together at that great old altar of our faith, it will be our job to make sure that their fire does not go out. Shabbat Shalom.